Welcome to The Explainer. You know, we see headlines from new studies every single day. But what's really going on behind the scenes? What are the hidden rules, the common pitfalls that can make or break whether a study is actually credible? Today, we're going beyond the headlines and into the engine room of scientific research.
So let's start with a big one. We're always told that when it comes to research, a bigger sample size is always better. More people means more solid results, right? Well, you might think so, but the real answer is a lot more complex, and frankly, a lot more interesting than that.
So yeah, we're going to pull back the curtain. In this explainer, we're going to arm you with the tools you need to spot robust science from the shaky stuff. This is your essential guide.
All right, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll bust the myth of sample size. Then we're going to ask a very modern question. Are online participants even real? After that, we'll explore the incredible power of using existing data, try to solve the riddle of survey response rates, and finally, uncover some of science's hidden failures.
First up, let's tackle one of the biggest misconceptions out there, this obsession with sample size. We're taught to trust the big numbers, but what if that's actually a mistake?
Just look at this number. It's kind of shocking, right? A review of over 1,200 really rigorous studies found that only 8.2% of researchers bothered to justify their sample size. For almost everyone else, it seems like it's just an afterthought, not a cornerstone of their study's design.
See, the proper way to figure out your sample size is with something called statistical power. Think of it like a microscope. If you're looking for a teeny tiny effect, you need a really powerful lens. That means a large sample. But if the effect is huge and obvious, you don't need as much power. The whole goal is to use just enough to find what you're actually looking for.
But here's the thing. It's a total balancing act between two types of errors. A type 1 error is a false positive. It's like the fire alarm going off when there's no fire. A type 2 error is a false negative. There's a real fire, but the alarm stays completely silent. And here's the catch. When you try to reduce the risk of one, you often increase the risk of the other. So how do researchers decide what a small or large effect even is so they can set their power? Well, a lot of them use these benchmarks from a statistician named Jacob Cohen. But get this, Cohen himself said his own definitions were subjective. They were based on a review of just one journal from 1960. Yeah.
And this leads to two really misleading rules of thumb. First, people blindly use Cohen's decades-old benchmarks. But come on, what's considered small in particle physics is probably going to be massive in social science. Context is everything. The second is that some researchers will actually accept more false positives, more false fire alarms, just so they can claim they found something with their small sample. It's not great science.
Okay, that brings us to our next big challenge. So much research has moved online, right? It gives you access to these huge pools of participants. But this convenience brings up a pretty scary question. How do you know if those people are even real? And listen, this isn't some small problem. This is a full-on 5-alarm fire. One study found that over half of its online participants were probably using fake identities. Just let that sink in for a second. That much bad data is a massive threat to a study's validity.
This is an absolutely critical challenge. I mean, if you can't trust your participants, you can't trust your data. So how can researchers or, critical readers like you sift the real people from the fakes?
Well, here's a really powerful solution. Instead of just one simple check, the smartest researchers use a layered approach. It's like digital detective work. They start with the basics, like looking for duplicate IP addresses. Then they dig deeper, analyzing an IP's threat score to see if it's a known bad actor, or checking if it's hiding behind a proxy server. It's a whole screening process, and only the most trustworthy data gets through.
So we've seen just how hard it can be to collect good data. But what if you didn't have to? Let's talk about how using these vast archives of existing data can absolutely supercharge research. Oh, the benefits here are just enormous. Archival data can act like a time machine, letting researchers study trends over decades. And with these huge sample sizes and just countless variables, these databases give you the statistical muscle to rule out other explanations and build a much stronger case for whatever you found. And the variety of data out there is just incredible. You can pull global financial data from Bloomberg, get detailed info on corporate executives from BoardX, or dig into rich demographic data from the US Census. And when you start combining these sources, well, the possibilities are pretty much endless.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about another number we're often told to trust, the survey response rate. You know the conventional wisdom, higher is always better. But, as you can probably guess by now, the truth is a little more nuanced.
And I mean, on the surface, things look pretty good. As you can see, response rates have been climbing, hitting almost 68% in 2020, mostly thanks to all these new online tools. But here's the critical question. Does a higher number actually mean higher quality data?
Not always. It really comes down to a functional versus a dysfunctional response rate. A functional rate gives you valid conclusions, even if the number seems low, because the people who responded are high quality. A dysfunctional rate, on the other hand, gives you bad data even if the number is super high, because maybe people felt pressured or they were just bored and clicking through to get paid.
So instead of getting fixated on that one number, we need to ask about the context. Was there any coercion involved? Were the participants actually qualified to answer? Were they motivated by genuine interest or just by the $5 they get at the end? See, the number itself doesn't tell the whole story. The context is what really determines the quality.
And for our last point, let's talk about the studies you don't see. Because it turns out, the research that gets ignored can be just as important as the research that gets published and makes headlines.
This whole thing is called publication bias, and it's often driven by something called the file drawer problem. Just imagine a researcher runs a perfect, rigorous study, but the results aren't flashy or exciting. So what happens? It gets tucked away in a file drawer, never to be seen again. Meanwhile, another study that did find a big, splashy result gets the headline. This means the science we actually see can be a skewed, overly optimistic version of reality.
But good researchers can fight this bias. One really powerful technique is called the fail-safe N. It's basically a calculation of how many of those unpublished, failed studies it would take to completely wipe out their result. In this real-world example, it would take over 73,000 failed studies to make this finding go away. A number that high, well, that gives you some real confidence that the result is legit.
So there you have it. We've talked about sample size myths, fake participants, the response rate riddle, and the file drawer problem. By understanding these hidden challenges, you're now equipped to be a much more critical and informed consumer of science. So the next time you see a big headline, you'll know exactly what questions to ask, and you'll be able to look beyond the hype to find the real story.